Hello, everyone. This is Rob Pike and Julie McAllen back with episode 19 of the continuing series, Revelation Reality, the Victory of Jesus. In our last episode, we looked at chapter 15, which was an introductory chapter to chapter 16, where we saw the beginning of the bowl judgments upon the land of Judea. And in examining the nature of these judgments, we noticed that they seem to be almost the same as the trumpet judgments earlier, weren't they, Julie?
Yeah, and that chart you shared was really helpful, Rob. Here it is again to show how these judgments line up. You'll see we got the trumpets on one side and the bowl judgments on the other, and they're quite similar. We got 7 of them there, and the plagues are quite similar. So it raised the question about why the repetition, why illustrate the same judgments in these 2 different ways. Well, it does highlight different nuances, as we said last week. And by using repetition for emphasis, it shows the powerful nature of these judgments. And in both cases, once again, we see the number 7. So there are 7 judgments, and that indicates completeness. That's what the number is. So we might also note that even though the 7 trumpet judgments highlighted most of the same things as the bowl judgments, so far we've seen that the effect highlighted was different. Speaking in general terms, the trumpet judgment showed the effects upon the land, whereas the bowl judgment showed the effects upon the people in the land. Isn't that the way you see it too, Rob?
I would say that generally speaking, after having viewed the first 4 bowl judgments, that's what we've seen. So I'm putting up the chart again. So when the first trumpet was blown, the effect was the fire upon the land. But when the first bowl judgment was poured out, the effect was sores upon the people. When the second trumpet judgment was blown, much of the sea was turned to blood, but when the second bowl was poured out, the effect was that everything in the sea died. When the third angel blew his trumpet, it fell upon the rivers and springs, as did the third bowl judgment, but different things were highlighted. And lastly, in comparison to the fourth trumpet, it was poured out upon the sun, moon, and the stars, whereas we saw that the fourth bowl judgment, only the sun was highlighted to show the effect of scorching fire upon men. So now as we go to the fifth bowl judgment, what do we see, Julie?
Well, we'll continue with verses 10 and 11 of Revelation 16 and see what that says. The 5th angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in anguish and cursed the God of heaven for their pain and sores. They did not repent of their deeds. And Rob, what we saw from the historical perspective upon the land was that the darkness of the horrors of the wars grew worse every day.
Yeah, we did. And for each day, it brought more pain, more death, and more destruction. And these people could see the devastating judgment was upon them. God had indeed deserted them, as they could see, and there was cursing God in the process. Notice what we see from Wars of the Jews, 6:1:1. That's by Josephus. Said, thus did the miseries of Jerusalem grow worse and worse every day, and the seditious were still more irritated by the calamities that they were under, even while the famine preyed upon themselves, after it had preyed upon the people. And indeed, the multitude of carcasses that lay in heaps upon one another was a horrible sight, and produced a pestilential stench, which was a hindrance to those that would make sallies out of the city and fight the enemy. But as those were to go into battle array, who had been already used to 10,000 murders, and must tread upon those dead bodies as they marched along, so were not they terrified, nor did they pity men as they marched over them. You could see how thoughtless this was. Heartless, yes. Nor did they deem this affront offered to the deceased to be any ill omen to themselves, but as they had their right hands already polluted with the murders of their own countrymen, and in that condition ran out to fight with the foreigners, they seem to have cast a reproach upon God himself, as if he were too slow in punishing them, for the war was not gone on with as if any hope of victory, for they glorified the brutish manner in that despair of deliverance that they were in. Wow, Julie, as this section tells us, it was as though losing the battle, in that process, they'd lost all of their hope, but those winning the battle had lost all their human compassion.
Yeah, pure hell. And we're just reading about it here, but can you imagine how depressing to have seen all of it happening as Josephus did? Yeah, wow. Well, let's continue with the record from the Apostle John and the bowl judgments in the next verses. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Okay, as Bible history has shown, Yahweh uses ungodly nations to perform his judgments. And by using 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are spirits of demons doing signs, we see the same pattern in how God does his judgments. But from a directional standpoint, at first look, this seems out of place because most of the forces employed in the destruction of Jerusalem came from the west and not from the northeast, which is the location of the Euphrates. So what do we do with that, Rob?
Well, that's what I would have thought myself, as you just mentioned. However, this idea is disputed by Russell, James Stuart Russell. In his book, The Parousia, he says the following: the drying up of the Euphrates seems plainly to signify its being crossed with ease and speed, and this, taken in connection with the corresponding symbol under the sixth trumpet, vis-a-vis the losing of the 4 angels bound at the Euphrates, points to the drawing of the troops from that quarter of the invasion of Judea. This we know to be a historical fact. Not only Roman legions from the frontier of the Euphrates, but auxiliary kings whose dominions lay in that region, such as Antiochus of Commagene, I don't even know how to pronounce that, and Sohemus and Sophene, most properly designated kings from the east, followed the eagles of the Romans to the siege of Jerusalem. This is taken from his book, The Parousia, in the Kindle edition. But now, before we move on, I would like to point out a problem which could mislead us as we read verse 14. And it is once again a place where we see those 2 Greek words, which we've talked about many times in the past, which have been both less specific and more specific simultaneously. Notice the words of the verse. It says, for they are spirits of demons doing signs, which go forth into the kings of the earth of the whole world to bring them together to the battle of that great day of God the Almighty. Now, once again, we see the words kings of the earth, but the word used for here is that Greek word gay, which we have mentioned several times, which in this context means the land, and also we see the expression and of the whole world. And that Greek word is the Greek word oikomenes, which is a specific reference to the land of the Roman Empire. Now, we've mentioned these Greek words in the past several times, haven't we, Julie?
Yeah, and it's really too bad these translations couldn't be more specific in mentioning that. Yeah. So thanks for validating the local nature of what's intended by these Greek words. So now let's move on to verses 15 and 16. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. You know, Rob, Jesus told his disciples at Matthew 24:44 that he would come at an hour they would not expect. Sounds like this coming like a thief. So even though Jesus stated his coming would be in that same generation, they didn't know the exact time. And you know, that word Armageddon has taken on such a loaded meaning, depending on who you listen to. But its reference at the end of the verse here is symbolic of the plain of Megiddo, where battles were fought in the Old Testament. Isn't that right, Rob?
Yes, that's true. And notice what it says about this place in Unger's Bible Dictionary. It says Megiddo occupied a very marked position on the southern rim of the plain of Esdraelon, the great battlefield of Palestine. It was famous for two great victories, Barak over the Canaanites and of Gideon over the Midianites, and for two great disasters, the deaths of Saul and of Josiah. Armageddon becomes a poetical expression for terrible and final conflict. Now, this is from Unger's Bible Dictionary. But as we both know, Julie, this term has taken from its original context by many and made into a futurist event that has no basis in fact. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hollywood's exaggerated misrepresentation of this for entertainment's sake, well, that's one thing. But when sincere, God-loving people are misled by those who claim to represent the Bible, it's really a mess. And sadly, a lot of people associate this word Armageddon with some kind of inevitable destruction of the planet. Right. And we both know all too well that groups like Jehovah's Witnesses, they've made the Battle of Armageddon into an event, which, you know, the scriptures do not show that. They end up planning their entire lives around it. More like they put off their lives as a result of this teaching. I know you know what I mean, Rob.
Yeah, we both know. And it's such a shame. Yeah. Having lived under this scenario myself, and you lived under it for a while yourself, in my earlier years, I know that it is a method that they have used to control every aspect of their lives. So we need to move on from this. So now as we move on to the seventh and final bowl, we see the following. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and there was a great earthquake, such as had not been since man came upon the earth. So great an earthquake it was, and so mighty. Once again, hyperbolic language we see. And this is done to make a point of the severity of the judgment, just like it is many times in the Old Testament. Isn't that right, Julie?
Yes, and we know that the writer of Hebrews spoke of this time in Hebrews chapter 12. And his voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, "Yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven." Hebrews 12:26. So we pointed out multiple times in this and other series on the last days that to the Jews, heaven and earth was representative as the temple of God. This can, you know, easily be confirmed in a Google search. The Jews viewed in various ways, but mainly when the temple was pictured, the most holy compartment represented the heavens, where God resided, and the outer court represented the earth, the abode of man.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the most popular view, but there are other ways that this term is meant, all within the Jewish system of worship. Notice what Adam Clark said in that verse you just quoted. Not the earth only, but also heaven, probably referring to the approaching destruction of Jerusalem, the total abolition of the political and ecclesiastical constitution of the Jews, the one being signified by the earth and the other by heaven. For the Jewish state and worship are frequently thus termed in the prophetic writings, and this seems to be the apostle's meaning as he evidently refers to Haggai 2:6, where this event is predicted. It may also remotely refer to the dissolution of all things. So, Julie, this is what Adam Clark had to say. So now as we continue, we see that conditions continue to deteriorate, don't they?
Yes, conditions continue to deteriorate in a big way. So I'll continue there in Revelation 16, verse 19. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. So the city of Jerusalem was divided physically into 3 parts. There was the upper city where the elites lived, the lower city where the masses lived, and then there was the expansion, which was sometimes called the second city. So once again, we see the identification marks of Babylon the Great. In fact, remember back in the 11th chapter of Revelation, how it was identified as the city where the Lord was crucified. So we're seeing these identification marks of it.
Yes, and the city was also politically divided into 3 factions. Notice the words of the Jewish historian. He said, so it happened that the sedition at the Jerusalem was revived and parted into 3 factions, and that one faction fought against the other, which partition in such evil cases may be said to be a good thing and the effect of divine justice. And so he sees this, he sees the divine justice. And as we continue in verse 20, we see that what seems to be a strange phrase in this verse. Can you enlighten us on the meaning of this, Julie?
Sure, I can read that. Revelation 16:20. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Yeah, that is a little strange, Rob. Adam Clark said that this probably means the capture of seaport towns and fortified places. Could be. Well, let's continue. We'll conclude with the reading of chapter 16, verse 21. And great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, and they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe. Wow. You found an explanation for this one in the writings of Josephus, didn't you, Rob?
Yeah, I did. And this was from book 3, chapter 7, section 9. It said, Vespasian set the engines for throwing stones and darts round about the city. The number of the engines was in all 160. Now that's 160 things throwing rocks at the people, big ones, and bid them fall to work and dislodge those that were upon the wall. At the same time, such engines were intended for the purpose, threw at once lances upon them with a great noise, and stones the weight of a talent were thrown by the engines that were prepared for that purpose, together with fire and a vast number of arrows, which made the wall so dangerous that the Jews durst not come upon it, but durst not come to those parts within the walls which were reached by the engines. For the multitude of the Arabian archers, as well as also those that threw darts and slung stones, fell to work at the same time with the engines. Wow. And all of this confirmed what Jesus said would happen, didn't it, Julie?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Jesus confirmed the destruction of all of this, including the temple, when he said on the Sermon on the Mount, going to quote here from Matthew, do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Matthew 5:17 and 18. This is a reference to the temple passing away.
That's a very important passage, and here's why. We know that, like you said, he meant the temple. And in addition to the other things we mentioned in the past, here's why. Now, if we look at what Jesus said, we know that we absolutely cannot take it literal because, as you said when you read the verse, For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Now think about this for a minute. If this is literal, it means that until the literal heavens and the literal earth pass away, that we are still and will always be under the law of Moses. So this can't be. And now, as we know, under the new covenant, we are under that new covenant. So what can we take away from this chapter, Julie, having read it all?
Yeah. Excellent point. Well, once again, Rob, basically what we're seeing is Jesus kept his promise. He fulfilled what he came to do. So to sum up this chapter, we learned that the 7 bowl judgments were the end of the judgments of God on Babylon the Great, which the Bible identified as Old Covenant Jerusalem. We'll see further evidence of that in the coming 2 chapters. Chapter 17 pictures her as a harlot, and her fall is described in chapter 18. All of this will further exemplify what we've been describing as the complete victory of Jesus over all of his adversaries. It's pretty exciting, and there's much more to come. So viewers, stay tuned.
Yes, excellent description, Julie. So before we leave, I just want to remind everyone to like and subscribe to this channel so you can get this information as soon as we put it out. So until the next time, as the Apostle Paul stated in 1 Corinthians 16:23, may the grace and favor of our Lord Jesus be with you, and have a great day.